I didn't lose my family all at once. I lost it quietly, one small moment at a time. And by the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late to fix it. If you've ever felt disrespected in a place you once called home, stay with me. This story doesn't rush, but it does move forward. And if family stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that dignity doesn't expire with age. And tell me where you're watching from. I read those comments more than you might think. Now let me take you back. It was Christmas Eve. The house was already full when I arrived. Laughter drifted from the living room. Plates clinked in the kitchen. From the outside, everything looked warm. Perfect. The kind of moment people post online and pretend lasts forever. I brought the pie. The same one I'd brought every year since my wife and I married. Apple. Homemade. Still warm. When I stepped into the dining room, something felt wrong immediately. My chair was gone. Not moved. Not borrowed. Gone. In its place sat my stepson Ryan, leaning back comfortably, one arm stretched across the table, like it belonged there. That chair had belonged to my father. Heavy oak. Worn smooth at the arms. It had always been mine. No announcement required. I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. Ryan finally looked up, smirked. "Oh," he said casually, "you can grab one from the kitchen." It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. That somehow made it worse. I looked at my wife. Not angrily. Hopefully. I waited for her to say something. Anything. She didn't even look up from the gravy boat. That's when I felt it. That quiet heat in your chest. That tells you a line has been crossed. I could have said something. I could have taken my place back. Instead, I did what I'd been doing. More and more lately. I swallowed it. I fetched a folding chair from the kitchen and sat at the far end of the table. The metal legs wobbled slightly. No one adjusted them. No one apologized. Dinner continued. Conversations passed over me, like background noise. Jokes landed. Stories were told. I nodded when someone glanced my way, smiled when required. Inside, something cracked quietly. This wasn't about furniture. It was about position. And that's when something else became clear. If this story were only about disrespect, I would have walked away that night. But what I learned afterward made that chair feel harmless by comparison. Later, Ryan shoved his chair back too hard. It scraped loudly across the floor. He laughed. "Relax," he said. "It's just a chair." I looked at the empty space, where I should have been sitting, and understood something unsettling. This hadn't started that night. The chair wasn't the problem. It was the announcement. After dinner, while everyone moved into the living room, I stepped outside. The cold air hit my face sharply. For a moment I welcomed it. It felt honest. I stood on the porch, listening to laughter through the door, thinking about how easily people rewrite your role. When you let small things slide. A chair. A comment. A silence where support should be. They don't stay small. They stack. And once people get comfortable taking from you quietly, they rarely stop on their own. I didn't know it yet. But that night wasn't the humiliation. It was the warning. Because what I discovered next proved that losing my seat at the table was the least of what they'd already taken from me. And by the time I finally understood that, I wasn't asking for my place back anymore. I was preparing to walk away from everything I thought this family was. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry. Anger burns hot and fades. This was colder. Heavier. It settled in my chest and refused to move. By morning, the house had returned to its usual rhythm. Coffee brewed. Cabinets opened and closed. Someone laughed at a phone screen. From the outside, everything looked normal again. That's how things like this survive. They hide inside routine. I replayed the night in fragments while I shaved, while I tied my shoes, while I watched my wife pack leftovers for her son. No one mentioned the chair. No apology. No joke. Not even a sideways glance. Silence has a way of confirming things you don't want to believe. Later that day, I checked my phone and noticed something small. Too small to feel intentional at first. A group message labeled "Family Plans." I'd been in it for years. Or at least, I thought I had. My name wasn't there anymore. No announcement. No explanation. Just messages scrolling past. Schedules, decisions, plans already made. That's when I understood something clearly. The chair hadn't been taken in a moment. It had been taken in pieces. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The way decisions were shared after they were final. The way my opinions were met with polite nods and no follow-up. I had mistaken peace for acceptance. That afternoon, I went into the garage. The one place that still felt unchanged. My tools hung where I'd left them. The workbench still bore the marks of old projects. I ran my hand along the edge and remembered teaching Ryan how to sand wood there when he was younger. Back then, he listened. Back then, I mattered. That's when my phone buzzed again. A notification from my bank. Unusual activity detected. Please review. I almost ignored it. Another habit. Another thing to explain away. Instead, I opened it. A loan inquiry. Large amount. My name listed as cosigner. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to correct itself. It didn't. I called immediately. The woman on the line was calm, professional. She read back the details. Application submitted 2 weeks earlier. Documents signed electronically. Approval pending. Sir, she said, the signature matches the one on file. Matches. That word landed harder than it should have. I asked her to read the name used on the signature line. She did. It wasn't my full name. It was the nickname my mother used when I was a boy. The one I hadn't used in decades. The one my wife knew. The one Ryan had heard countless times. My hand tightened around the phone. The chair came back to me. The shove. The silence. The pieces finally aligned. The disrespect wasn't random. The exclusion wasn't accidental. They hadn't just taken my seat. They had taken my name. Quietly. Assuming embarrassment would keep me silent. Assuming routine would keep me passive. I ended the call and sat there in the garage, the hum of the refrigerator inside the house suddenly too loud. Whatever this was, it wasn't a family disagreement. And if I wanted my name back, not just on paper but in my own life, I couldn't handle it inside that house. By the time the sun dipped low, one thing was clear. That chair had been taken so I wouldn't notice what else was missing. But now that I had noticed, I wasn't asking for anything back. Next, I was going to make it official. I didn't go back inside the house right away. I stayed in the garage, sitting on an overturned bucket, letting the bank call settle. There's a difference between suspicion and confirmation. Suspicion circles your thoughts. Confirmation drops straight into your chest. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had used me. The next morning, I went to the credit union in person. Not because it was faster, but because I needed to look someone in the eye. Phones make it easy to soften the truth. I wanted clarity, not comfort. The woman at the front desk recognized my name immediately. Smiled the way people do when everything feels routine. "I'm here about a loan application," I said. She pulled it up on her screen and frowned. "Yes, it's still pending." There was a verification note. "That's why I'm here," I replied. "I didn't apply for anything." Her posture changed. She asked for my ID. Asked me to step into a side office. Offered coffee I didn't touch. A manager joined us. Polite. Careful. Already choosing his words. They laid the paperwork out on the desk. The amount was larger than I expected. Not reckless. Calculated. Just enough to matter. Just enough to hurt if it went wrong. I studied the digital signature. At first glance it looked right. Same looping stroke. Same pressure at the end. But I know my own hand. And this wasn't it. Who submitted this? I asked. The manager hesitated. The applicant listed your stepson as the primary borrower. There it was. And the co-signer? I asked. You, he said, listed as consenting electronically. I didn't, I replied. He slid a form toward me. Fraud affidavit. No accusations. No drama. Just process. As I signed it, something surprised me. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt clear. Embarrassment belongs to people who think they've done something wrong. I hadn't. I'd been taken advantage of quietly, deliberately, by people who assumed I'd rather stay silent than challenge them. That assumption was their mistake. The manager explained the next steps. Investigation. Signature analysis. Temporary freeze. Possible legal review. Someone will be contacted, he said carefully. Good, I replied. I didn't go home after that. Instead, I drove to a small diner on the edge of town. Cracked vinyl booths. Coffee that tasted like it had been refilled 1,000 times. I ordered breakfast even though it was nearly noon, and watched steam rise from the mug. The shove at the table came back to me. Not angry. Not impulsive. Claiming. The chair. The loan. The silence. All part of the same movement. Removing me. Without ever saying the words. When I finally returned home that evening, nothing looked different. My wife asked about my day. Ryan wasn't there. She said he'd been busy with paperwork. Paperwork. I answered calmly. Briefly. Nothing she could react to. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Another alert. The loan application had been formally flagged. Investigation opened. I stared at the screen and understood something clearly. This wasn't going to resolve itself with a conversation over dinner. This had moved into places where tone didn't matter, where authority didn't matter. Only records did. And once records start talking, family narratives get very quiet. I turned off the light. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I slept without replaying the chair. Because now I knew the truth. That chair wasn't taken because I was weak. It was taken because they believed I wouldn't stand up anywhere that counted. What they didn't realize was this. I already had. And the next time my name came up, it wouldn't be theirs to use. The investigation didn't make noise right away. That's something people rarely understand. Real consequences don't arrive with sirens. They arrive with emails, scheduled calls, and phrases like, "We need clarification." By midweek, the credit union had frozen the application completely. No funds released. No progress. Just questions. That's when the pressure started at home. My wife didn't accuse me directly. She never did. Instead, she worried out loud. "Ryan's really stressed," she said one evening. "Folding laundry that wasn't mine. He's been trying to get his life together. You know how hard it is for young people." I nodded. Non-committal. "He said there was an issue with the bank," she continued. "Something about paperwork being flagged." "Is that so?" I asked. She glanced at me, searching my face. Tone. Guilt. Reassurance. "He thought you'd help smooth it out," she said carefully. "You've always been good with that kind of thing." There it was. Not an apology. Not a question. An expectation. "I already did help," I said calmly. Her hands paused mid-fold. "I went in person," I added, "to clear things up." The air changed. Not dramatically. Subtly. Like a door closing quietly somewhere in the house. She didn't ask what I'd said. She didn't ask what they'd said. She only said, "You didn't need to make it formal." Formal. That word again. Why not? I asked. She looked away. Because families don't handle things like that. I let the silence finish the sentence for her. Families also don't forge signatures. Families don't take loans in someone else's name. Families don't humiliate you at the table and expect you to smile. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I asked, "What exactly did Ryan tell you?" She hesitated. That the bank overreacted. Overreacted. I nodded once. Banks don't overreact, I said. They verify. That night, my phone buzzed again. Not an alert. A call. A fraud specialist from the credit union. Calm voice. Direct questions. Dates. Access. Who lived in the house? Who knew my personal details? I answered everything honestly. At the end of the call, she said, "We'll need a handwriting sample from the borrower." Borrower. Not cosigner. Not helper. Borrower. After I hung up, I sat alone in the living room. Lights off. Listening to the house breathe. Every creak felt louder than before. That's when I understood something clearly. They hadn't just counted on my silence. They'd counted on my pride. The next morning, Ryan showed up unannounced. No knock. Just the door opening and closing. He stood in the doorway, like he used to as a teenager, trying to read my mood before choosing his words. "They're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be," he said. I looked up from my coffee. "Who's they?" "The bank," he said quickly. "This could have been handled privately." "Could it?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "I mean, we're family." I set the mug down slowly. "Then you should have asked," I said. His jaw tightened. "You didn't have to escalate it." I met his eyes. "You escalated it. When you signed my name." For the first time. He didn't have an answer ready. He left shortly after. Quietly. No argument. No goodbye. That's when I understood what truly scared them. Not consequences. Records. Because records don't bend for family. They don't accept explanations. They don't care who sits in which chair. And once they exist, they keep speaking. Long after everyone else goes silent. The next step wouldn't happen at the dinner table. It would happen in a place where my name finally belonged to me again. On the record. And once it did, there would be no folding chairs left to offer. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Plain envelope. Official return address. No drama in the packaging. Just the kind of paper that changes things quietly. A hearing had been scheduled. Not a family meeting. Not a mediation. A hearing. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my wife. Not Ryan. I wanted to see how far they'd let their version of events stretch. Before it snapped. In the days leading up to it, the house felt smaller. Conversations stayed shallow. Every question came wrapped in concern instead of curiosity. "How are you holding up?" "You look tired. This stress can't be good for you." No one asked what I'd learned. No one asked what was true. At the courthouse, the air was cool and impersonal. I sat on a wooden bench and watched people pass through metal detectors, each of them carrying a problem they never imagined would end up here. When Ryan arrived, he avoided my eyes. My wife sat 2 rows behind him, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked like someone waiting for a diagnosis. The clerk called the case. Inside the hearing room, everything slowed down. The judge didn't rush. The credit union's representative spoke clearly, without emotion. Documents were entered. Dates were read aloud. Then the digital signature appeared on the screen. Enlarged. Unavoidable. The handwriting analyst spoke next. She didn't accuse. She compared. Stroke pressure. Letter formation. Habitual curves. She explained how people can mimic a signature, and how they always leave something behind. This signature, she said calmly, was not produced by the account holder. The room went quiet. Ryan's attorney tried to reframe it. Stress. Misunderstanding. Family arrangements. He suggested I'd agreed verbally, and simply forgotten. The judge looked at him for a long moment. "Verbal consent does not create a digital signature," she said, "and forgetting does not explain this." She turned to Ryan. "Did you sign this document?" she asked. Ryan hesitated. That hesitation lasted longer than any argument could have. "Yes," he said finally. "But I thought." The judge raised her hand. No explanations, she said. Just answers. I heard my wife gasp softly behind him. The fraud specialist testified next. Call logs, IP addresses, device access, all pointing in the same direction. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion. It was intentional. When the judge spoke again, her tone was firm but measured. This is not a family dispute, she said. This is unauthorized financial activity. The court will proceed accordingly. No shouting. No gavel slam. Just consequence. Outside, the hallway buzzed with whispers. My wife approached me, eyes wet. I didn't know it went this far, she said. I nodded. I know. Ryan stood a few feet away, staring at the floor. Smaller than I'd ever seen him. For a moment I felt something close to pity. Then I remembered the chair, the signature, the silence. I walked past them without another word. In the parking lot, I sat in my car longer than necessary, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling something unexpected settle in. Relief. Not because I'd won, but because my name, my actual name, had finally been spoken out loud, in a place where it mattered. That hearing didn't fix everything, but it changed the balance. Because once the truth enters the record, it stops being personal. It becomes permanent. And from that moment on, no one could move me quietly anymore. What came next wasn't about punishment. It was about rebuilding a life, where my place wasn't borrowed, my voice wasn't optional, and my name belonged to me again. The days after the hearing didn't explode the way people imagine justice should. Nothing collapsed overnight. No dramatic apologies. No sudden understanding. Instead, everything slowed. Ryan stopped coming around as often. When he did, he kept his distance. Conversations clipped. Eyes lowered. He no longer carried the confidence of someone who thought consequences were for other people. My wife changed too. Quieter. More careful with her words. As if the house itself had become a witness she no longer trusted. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one adjusting. That unsettled everyone. I stayed in the house, but only physically. Emotionally, I had already stepped back. I stopped explaining myself, stopped smoothing things over, stopped absorbing discomfort, so others could remain comfortable. Silence, when chosen, feels very different than silence forced on you. One afternoon, I noticed something small. The oak chair had been moved. Against the wall. Not at the table. Not in use. Just placed aside. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't respect. It was avoidance. They didn't want to acknowledge what it represented anymore. That's when I understood. I couldn't stay. Not because I was angry, but because staying would mean pretending. The truth hadn't changed. The foundation of the house. And it had. I began packing slowly. Intentionally. Only what mattered. Books with notes in the margins. Photographs from before the marriage. Tools I'd bought with my own hands. And eventually, the chair. Lifting it reminded me how heavy it really was. Solid. Built to last. My father once told me, good furniture teaches you patience. He was right. My wife watched from the doorway as I carried it out. You don't have to do this, she said. I paused. I do, I replied. Just not angrily. She didn't follow me. She didn't argue. That silence said everything. I moved into a small apartment. Across town. Nothing impressive. Clean lines. Quiet nights. A place without expectations. Attached to every room. The first evening there felt strange. Too open. Too empty. Then I set the chair by the window. Light pouring in. No one telling me where it belonged. And something inside me settled. I wasn't running away. I was stepping forward. Without needing permission. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how often people confuse endurance with weakness. How easily patience gets mistaken for consent. How family can rewrite your role if you don't stop them early enough. But I learned something else too. You don't reclaim dignity by demanding it. from people who benefited from taking it. You reclaim it by choosing environments where it can't be taken quietly. This wasn't the end of the story. There were still conversations ahead, still decisions to make, still a final separation of lives tangled too long. But the hardest part was already done. I had stopped shrinking. And once you stop shrinking, the world adjusts, whether it wants to or not. The final chapter of this story isn't loud. It's steady, just like the chair that followed me out the door. I didn't rush the ending. After I moved into the apartment, life didn't suddenly feel perfect. It felt quieter. And that quiet did something important. It gave me space to hear myself again. Mornings slowed down. Coffee by the window. The oak chair positioned where the light hit it just right. No one telling me where things belonged. No one deciding my place without asking. For the first time in years, I wasn't adapting. I was choosing. The legal matters concluded without drama. Paperwork finalized. Names corrected. Accounts sealed. The loan was closed permanently. Under the responsibility it belonged to. My name stayed clean. That mattered more than I expected. Not because of pride, but because a name carries history, effort, time. It deserves protection. My wife and I spoke only once more. Briefly. Calmly. She apologized in the careful way people do, when they're sorry for consequences, not actions. I accepted it, without reopening doors that were already closed. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means release. Ryan never reached out again. And that was fine. Some relationships don't need closure. They need distance. What surprised me most was how differently people treated me afterward. Not because they knew the details, but because I carried myself differently. Straighter. Quieter. Certain. Disrespect loses interest when it realizes it's been noticed. I kept the chair, not as a symbol of bitterness, but as a reminder of the moment silence stopped being a choice and became a habit, of the night I stopped absorbing disrespect for the sake of peace, of the day my name spoke, in a room where truth mattered more than family dynamics. People talk about revenge, like it has to be loud, like it has to hurt someone else. This didn't hurt anyone. It healed me. Walking away wasn't defeat. It was alignment. And alignment is powerful. If you're watching this, and something in your life feels quietly wrong, a small humiliation, a pattern of being overlooked, a role that keeps shrinking, pay attention. Those moments aren't isolated. They're instructions. You don't need permission to step away from a table where respect is optional. You don't need to argue to reclaim your dignity. And you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose where you sit next. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing. These stories exist to remind us that dignity doesn't expire, and silence doesn't have to be permanent. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from. Not for numbers, but because every story sounds different. When you know someone's listening. Thank you for staying until the end.